They gave an ultimatum. We gave a choice. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the fleet carrier Vigilance, her form a still point in a storm of quiet efficiency. Beyond the armored glass, the marbled blue-green world of Viridian hung in the black, a jewel held hostage. Around it, stark and brutal, was the Valbran hegemony fleet, 30 ships arranged in a perfect, suffocating lattice of overlapping fire fields. They were a statement of doctrinal purity, a physical manifestation of a threat, delivered without negotiation. The ultimatum had been simple surrender, Viridian's proprietary atmospheric reclamation codices, or the colony would be rendered sterile from orbit. The clock on her main tactical display showed 71 hours, 54 minutes, and 12 seconds remaining. Solace confirmed their disposition, Rostova said, her voice a low anchor in the hum of the ship's life support. The synthesized voice of the fleet mind, calm as deep space filled the air. Confirmed, Admiral. Hegemony dispositions match doctrinal templates for a Class 3 orbital denial. Executor Kalen's flagship, the Iron Balance, holds the geometric center. They are not deviating. Probabilities suggest they will not. The air on the bridge tasted of ozone and recycled oxygen, a scent she had known for 30 years. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Jax, traced a line on his own console, the light glinting off the silver in his dark hair. They're arrogant, Admiral. Holding a textbook formation assumes we'll play by their book. He tapped a control, and a shimmering overlay of potential attack vectors bloomed over the hostile fleet. Each one was a path to mutual annihilation. Their book was written in blood. Ours was written in math. Rostova watched the red lines converge. The hegemony doctrine was infamous overwhelm demand and punish any deviation with absolute finality. It was a philosophy that had crushed rebellions and absorbed worlds for a century, but it had never faced a Terran Federation fleet operating under the Rostova mandate. Teach first. Fight only when forced. And if forced, teach a lesson that could not be forgotten. She felt the subtle thrum of the Vigilance's fusion core through the soles of her boots, a patient, monstrous power held in perfect check. They believe their will is an immutable law of physics, Rostova murmured. We are here to introduce a new variable. The ultimatum was not just a threat to Viridian. It was a challenge to the very soul of the Federation. It was a test of their resolve to offer a hand even when faced with a fist. We would not become the monster to defeat it. The countdown bled seconds away, each tick a heartbeat for the 10 million souls on the planet below. Rostova's gaze was fixed on the enemy flagship. Executor Kalen believed this was already over. He had presented his terms and expected compliance. He was about to learn that humanity did not bargain with extinction threats. He was about to get his choice. Below in the sprawling hydroponics sector of Viridian's capital city, a young girl named Ilara pressed her hand against the cool plasteel of a viewport. Her father stood behind her, his hand a warm weight on her shoulder. They watched the new stars in their sky, the cold, steady lights of the hegemony ships, and the fainter, warmer glints of the human fleet. "Are they going to save us?" "Papa," she asked, her breath fogging the view. Her father squeezed her shoulder gently. His own eyes locked on the orbital ballet. "They are humanity's promise," he said, his voice thick with a hope that felt fragile as glass. "They hold the line." "Hold the line." Solace run pattern analysis on their comms chatter, Rostova commanded. "I want to know if Kalen is speaking to his whole fleet or just his sub-commanders. I want to know how tight his leash is." "Processing, Admiral," the AI replied. Its voice was devoid of emotion, yet Rostova could sense the immense processing power being directed at the task, sifting through terabytes of encrypted signals for the faintest flicker of doctrinal weakness. The glare from the tactical holotank cast long shadows across the command deck, making canyons of the spaces between consoles. A low coolant hiss from a nearby conduit was the only sound for a long moment. Jax looked up, his expression tight. They're broadcasting their ultimatum on all civilian channels. Standard psychological warfare. Trying to turn the colonists against us, make them pressure us to fold. They thought fear was a weapon. We knew it was a poison. It will have the opposite effect. Rostova stated her certainty absolute. It will unify them. She had seen it a dozen times before. The hegemony's greatest strength, its unwavering brutalist doctrine, was also its most exploitable flaw. They saw populations as numbers to be cowed, not as people to be inspired. They could not comprehend a unity forged in defiance rather than terror. "The fleet is ready." Admiral Jax reported, his voice crisp and professional. "Decoy swarms are loaded. Electronic warfare suites are spooled. The mirror arrays are standing by for deployment." Rostova nodded a slow, deliberate motion. "Phase 1 is a conversation, Jax. We're going to ask them a question. Let's see how they answer." She allowed herself a small, cold smile. The question would not be verbal. It would be written in the language of energy signatures, sensor ghosts, and impossible physics. We would teach them to doubt their own eyes. "Execute." Operation Shrouded Hand, Rostova ordered. The command rippled through the fleet instantly. From the belly of the Vigilance and its escorts, swarms of drones no larger than a human fist silently ejected into the void. They were simple things, hulls of hyper-reflective material, and a small emitter core, but in concert, they were a tool of profound deception. They began to move, arranging themselves into a complex, shimmering geometry between the two fleets. Solas's voice returned, a razor's edge of pure data. "Comms analysis complete. Executor Kalen's command authority is absolute. All fleet orders are routed directly from the iron balance and are executed without subordinate confirmation. He is a single point of failure." Rostova's smile tightened. Not a failure, a feature. A single mind, no matter how brilliant, was a bottleneck. A single doctrine, no matter how effective, was a cage. Kalen had built his fleet into a perfect weapon, but he had forgotten that the most resilient things in the universe were not rigid. They were adaptable. They built a wall. We would become the water that flowed around it. The drone swarm, now fully deployed, activated its emitters. In an instant, a ghost image of the human fleet bloomed in the void. A perfect spectral copy shifted 1,000 kilometers to the port side. It had mass energy readings, even faint gravimetric distortions. It was a lie made of light, and numbers a challenge to the hegemony's certitude. The console glare intensified as the decoy fleet's signatures were pushed to active levels. "Ghost Fleet is live." Jax confirmed, his knuckles white on the edge of his console. "We are broadcasting standard fleet maneuvering chatter on all decoy channels." Now came the wait. The first move in this system-scale chess match had been made. How Kalen responded would tell them everything they needed to know about the man and the doctrine he served. Would he be cautious? Would he be curious? Or would his doctrine demand a swift, punitive response to this unexpected variable? The faint vibration of the deck plates under Rostova's feet seemed to hum with anticipation. The silence was the real battlefield. The hegemony fleet remained motionless. For a full minute they did nothing. The ghost fleet continued its slow, deliberate advance into the space between them and Viridian. The countdown clock ticked past 71 hours. Rostova held her breath, watching the unmoving icons of the enemy ships. Her own heart monitor, a small icon on her personal display, beat a steady, disciplined rhythm. Then a flicker of movement. "Energy spike from the iron balance," Jax called out. "He's not delegating, he's taking the shot himself." A lance of pure white energy, a particle beam of immense power, crossed the void in less than a second. It struck the ghost image of the Vigilance dead center. The drone swarm flared its mirror-like surfaces, scattering the beam's energy in 1,000 different directions, a brilliant, harmless coruscation of wasted power. The ghost fleet flickered but held its form. Their power was a hammer. They saw every problem as a nail. Rostova let out the breath she was holding. He's impulsive. His doctrine doesn't allow for uncertainty. He saw a threat and he struck. This was the answer she needed. Kalen was a true believer. He was predictable. Admiral Solace interjected, its tone infinitesimally sharpened. I am detecting an anomalous energy resonance from within the hegemony formation. It is faint, masked by the energy discharge, and does not conform to known Valberan ship profiles. A new icon, a soft pulsing query mark, appeared deep inside the enemy lines. Here was the first mystery. A hidden ship, a stealth platform, Jax asked, already tasking a sensor suite to get a better lock. Unlikely, Rostova said, her eyes narrowed in thought. The hegemony doctrine is built on overwhelming visible force. Subterfuge is not their way. What are you, Kalen? What are you hiding behind your perfect wall? We followed the truth, no matter where it led. Maintain the Ghost Fleet's advance, Rostova ordered. And Solace, dedicate 20% of your processing power to that anomaly. I want it identified. The deck plates hummed, a constant reminder of the contained star that powered her ship, her fleet, her resolve. The scent of recycled air seemed sharper, now charged with a new and dangerous energy. The hegemony fleet began to shift. Not all of them, but a wing of 5 heavy cruisers broke formation, moving to intercept the Ghost Fleet. They moved in perfect synchronized precision, a testament to their training and their rigid command structure. They were taking the bait. But the bait was not the trap. As the hegemony cruisers moved, they opened a temporary gap in their southern blockade quadrant. It was a corridor, narrow and fleeting, but it was there. It was exactly what Solace's predictive models had suggested would happen. But it felt too easy. Doctrine was one thing, but tactical incompetence was another. Kalen was not a fool. He's letting us see that opening, Jax said, voicing her own thoughts. He wants us to think he's a slave to his textbook. Precisely, Rostova agreed. Which means the corridor is a trap. She looked at the pulsing query mark Solace had flagged. The anomaly was located directly along the path a ship would take through that corridor. A civilian transport pilot on Viridian's orbital station watched his own tactical display, a bootleg feed from the planetary defense grid. He saw the hegemony ships move, saw the gap open. A murmur of excitement went through the small observation lounge where other off-duty pilots were gathered. There it is, one of them whispered. The opening. The Federation's going to break through. The pilot, a veteran of a dozen border skirmishes, wasn't so sure. He'd seen traps that looked like hope before. The hope was the deadliest part. Hope unchecked is a liability. Solace. What is the nature of the anomaly? Rostova demanded. Analysis ongoing, Admiral. The signal is heavily shielded and intermittent. It pulses in a sequence that correlates with their fleet's passive sensor sweeps. It is not a ship. It has the resonance of a distributed network command node. A network. Not a single object, but many, all listening for a command. Rostova's blood ran cold. It's a minefield, she breathed. A cloaked, smart minefield. Jax's face hardened. He wasn't just blockading us. He was baiting us. He wanted us to make a run for that corridor. The sheer cynicism of it was breathtaking. Kalen had laid a trap and expected them to sacrifice their own ships to test it. He would see it as a validation of his superiority. He saw his opponents as expendable pieces on a board. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. The Ghost Fleet. The beautiful lie made of light had saved them from a catastrophic blunder. It had made Kalen show his hand. Now it was Rostova's turn to change the game. She could not simply avoid the trap. She had to use it. She had to turn his own weapon, his own certainty, back against him. "He has shown us his sword," Rostova said, her voice ringing with a new and terrible clarity. "Now we will show him the mirror. The reckoning would be a reflection. So thus can our mirror arrays manipulate the hegemony's own sensor sweeps?" Rostova asked, a daring, impossible idea taking shape in her mind. "Theoretically, Admiral. It would require precise timing and immense computational power. We would need to catch their active sensor pulses and redirect them with perfect fidelity, creating a false echo that appears to originate from a different location." "Can you do it?" There was a pause that lasted only a fraction of a second, but it felt like an eternity. "Yes, Admiral. I can." A plan was a promise made to the future. "Here is my intent," Rostova declared, her voice resonating on the hushed command deck. "We will not just avoid the minefield. We will move it." Jack stared at her, his professional calm finally cracking into open astonishment. "Move it, Admiral. That's not possible." "We're not going to move the mines themselves," Rostova explained, her mind racing, connecting the pieces. "We're going to move their perceived location. We will use the mirror arrays to convince the hegemony fleet that their own minefield is located 1,000 kilometers from where it actually is. And then..." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Then we will make them fly right through it," Jax finished, a look of dawning, horrified respect on his face. It was a gambit of unprecedented audacity. A deception so profound it bordered on a violation of physics. But the hegemony's doctrine, their unyielding certainty in their own sensors and their own tactics, made them vulnerable to it. They trusted their machines. They would be undone by them. "Solace, begin calculations for Operation Lattice Shift," Rostova commanded. "I want a solution that repositions the perceived minefield directly in the path of Kalen's flagship." The hum of the ship's systems deepened as the fleet mind dedicated a vast portion of its consciousness to the task. The air grew warmer by a fraction of a degree, a tangible sign of the immense intellectual effort being exerted. The hegemony cruisers that had moved to intercept the Ghost Fleet were now closing in. They began firing their secondary weapon batteries, peppering the area with plasma bursts and kinetic rounds. The Ghost Fleet flickered and died. Its purpose served. The drones that had created it went inert, their reflective surfaces now indistinguishable from the background debris of space. The hegemony pilots would report a victory. They would report the destruction of the Federation's vanguard. Let them have their small victories. "The cruisers are returning to their original positions," Admiral Jax reported. "They believe the threat has been neutralized." "They are correct," Rostova said softly. "The threat has been neutralized. Just not the one they were looking at." She looked at the tactical display. The pulsing icon of the hidden minefield was the key. Kalen believed it was his hidden ace. He had no idea she was about to take it from him and make it hers. Suddenly, a new alert flashed on the screen. A Priority 1 message from Viridian Planetary Control. Rostova's stomach tightened. On screen, the face of a harried colonial administrator appeared. "Admiral Rostova, we're tracking a convoy of civilian evacuation ships. They made a run for it. They thought your decoy was a real offensive. They tried to use the confusion to slip past the blockade." A cold dread filled the bridge. Rostova stared at the screen, her mind reeling. 3 small, unarmed ships filled with families were racing toward the very corridor Kalen had mined. They had mistaken the opening for a chance at freedom. They were flying into the heart of the trap. The countdown clock now read 68 hours, but for those ships it was a matter of minutes. The hegemony fleet noticed them almost immediately. A new set of icons appeared on the tactical display as Kalen detached another wing of ships to intercept them. But they were not moving to destroy the convoy. They were moving to herd it, to guide it. "He's not going to kill them, Jaxo," breathed his voice laced with disgust. "He's going to use them. He's going to force them right into his own minefield to prove a point. Executor Kalen was turning the situation into a public execution, a lesson for the colony and for the Federation fleet on the price of defiance. He would make them watch. Their cruelty was a calculated instrument. Solace, what is the convoy's time to impact with the minefield? Rostova's voice was dangerously calm. At their current velocity, 7 minutes, 12 seconds. 7 minutes. Not enough time to reach them. Not enough time to warn them in a way the hegemony couldn't jam. Not enough time for anything but a choice. Solace's voice, a calm stream of logic, presented the options. Sacrifice the convoy to protect the larger plan. Reveal their knowledge of the minefield, sacrificing the element of surprise. Or engage in a direct suicidal assault on the herding ships. Each option was a different shade of failure. Rostova's jaw clenched. She would not sacrifice civilians. She would not be forced into a losing fight. And she would not let Kalen turn human hope into a weapon against them. There is a fourth option, she said, her eyes fixed on the display, seeing not the icons but the people. We accelerate the plan. We do not abandon our own. Jax, get me a firing solution on the lead hegemony cruiser herding that convoy. Non-lethal. I want to disable their engines with a focused particle beam. A single, precise shot. Admiral Jax hesitated. That will reveal our position and our intent. The lattice shift gambit will be compromised. The gambit is worthless if we lose who we are. Rostova countered, her voice ringing with absolute authority. The conflict between her moral line and Solace's cold calculus had reached its breaking point. This was her decision, the human decision. We will make the shot, and we will deal with the consequences. The ledger must be balanced, but some debts cannot be paid in blood. Solace, can you execute the lattice shift on a compressed timeline? Not for the entire minefield, just a section of it. Create a safe path for that convoy right now. The AI was silent for a full 2 seconds. The fans in its server cores whined, the heat shimmer in the air above them becoming visible. The calculations would be complex. Probabilities of success are 62%. 62%. A coin toss in the void with thousands of lives on the line. But it was better than zero. Do it, Rostova ordered. A new energy signature flared from the vigilance. Not a weapon, but a tightly focused beam of telemetry data aimed at the mirror array drones. The tiny, silent machines swiveled in the dark, their hyper-reflective surfaces aligning with impossible precision. They were no longer preparing to create a grand illusion. They were preparing to perform microsurgery on the very fabric of reality. They were going to bend light-bend sensors and bend the enemy's will. Firing solution locked for the engine disablement. Jax reported, his face grim. On your mark, Admiral. Rostova looked at the convoy, 3 tiny sparks of light fleeing a terrible darkness. They were everything she had sworn to protect. They were the stakes, the reason, the soul of her mission. Mark. From a concealed emitter on the Vigilance, a thin, almost invisible beam of energy sliced across space. It was not the brute force of a hegemony weapon, but a scalpel of focused particles. It struck the rearmost hegemony cruiser, impacting directly on its primary drive cone. There was no explosion. The ship simply stopped. Its engines guttered and died, its momentum carrying it forward as a dead piece of metal. A stunned silence fell over the hegemony comms channels. Direct hit, Jax confirmed, a note of awe in his voice. Engine assembly fused. They are dead in the water. The cost was immediate. Alarms blared across the hegemony fleet as they registered the source of the attack. Their passive sensors became active, flooding the space with a storm of energy. Kalen now knew their exact position. He knew they were not where their decoy had been. The element of surprise was gone, but it had been traded for something far more valuable. Lattice shift is active, Solace announced, its voice strained, the data equivalent of panting. I have created a temporary safe corridor 100 kilometers wide directly in the convoy's path. The hegemony sensors will perceive the mines as being present, but the physical space is clear. Rostova watched, her heart in her throat, as the 3 civilian ships flew directly into the area that on the hegemony tactical displays was a dense field of lethal ordnance. The remaining hegemony cruisers, stunned by the disablement of their consort, hesitated for a crucial second. They watched, expecting the convoy to be vaporized. The ships passed through unharmed. A ripple of confusion spread through the enemy fleet. Kalen's voice, cold and laced with fury, finally cut through the silence broadcast on an open channel. Federation Admiral, you have revealed your position for nothing. A parlor trick with light and a single lucky shot will not save you. You have only postponed the inevitable. Executor Rostova replied, her own voice, calm and steady, patched directly into his broadcast. This is not a trick. This is a lesson. You are accustomed to fighting opponents who mirror your tactics. We are not them. We are here to teach you the cost of your ultimatum doctrine. She was no longer asking a question. She was making a statement. The lesson is simple. Rostova continued, her words carried to every ship in both fleets and down to the hopeful listeners on Viridian. Human lives are not bargaining chips. Your threats have been weighed, measured, and found wanting. You have a choice. Withdraw your fleet and renounce your ultimatum, or we will dismantle your fleet piece by piece and your doctrine along with it. The arrogance of Kalen's reply was immediate. Your fleet is outnumbered and outgunned. Your posturing is meaningless. The 70-hour deadline stands, and now for your insolence it will be enforced to the letter. The deadline is yours. Executor, not mine, Rostova said, cutting the channel. She turned to her command crew. The time for subtlety was over. The first phase had been about deception. The next would be about control. She had saved the convoy, but in doing so had initiated a direct confrontation. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. The heat in the bridge was no longer just from the computers. It was the heat of an impending storm. Their doctrine was a cage, and she had just rattled the bars. Solace, what was the effect of the partial lattice shift on the main plan? She asked, her mind already moving to the next set of calculations. The partial activation has introduced unforeseen complexities, the AI admitted. The hegemony's sensor network is now actively attempting to compensate for what it perceives as localized sensor ghosting. They are learning. This will make the full-scale deception more difficult. This was the first true escalation. Her moral choice to save the convoy had come at a tactical price. Kalen's fleet was adapting. The easy, predictable target was gone. Jax, bring the fleet to condition red. Prepare for direct engagement. Solace. I need a new model. If their sensors are adapting, we can't just trick them. We have to overwhelm them. We are no longer moving the minefield. We are going to make the entire system a hall of mirrors. A new strategy was forged in the fire of necessity. The civilian vignette shifts to a crew member aboard the Vigilance, a young ensign in the damage control department. He's running a diagnostic on the internal fire suppression system, the scent of ozone and hot metal filling his small workshop. He listens to the Admiral's broadcast over the ship's internal comm, her calm, defiant voice a stark contrast to the low, anxious thrum of the ship around him. He feels the vibration change as the ship goes to condition red, a deeper, more menacing growl from the engines. He checks the seals on his damage control suit, not with fear, but with a focused sense of purpose. He is a part of the line. They were all the line. Rostova stood before the holotank, which now displayed a chaotic storm of sensor pulses and counterpulses. The clear lines of the initial confrontation had dissolved into a brawl. The hegemony was no longer holding its perfect formation. They were hunting. The anomaly. Solace Rostova said, her focus returning to the original mystery. the command node for the minefield. With their network in flux, can you get a clearer signal? Affirmative, Admiral. I have isolated its command frequency. It is not just a trigger, it is a logic hub. The mines are not just proximity fused, they are networked to selectively detonate based on target profiles. Solace paused. Executor Kalen has a dead man's switch. If his flagship is destroyed, the entire minefield is programmed to detonate simultaneously. Jack swore under his breath. The field is close enough to the planet that a cascading detonation would shatter the upper atmosphere. It would be an extinction-level event. The true nature of Kalen's trap was revealed. It was not just a tactical barrier. It was a fail-safe. A guarantee that even if he lost, he would still win. His ultimatum was backed by a planetary death sentence that would trigger even if they defeated him. It was the ultimate expression of the hegemony's doctrine: if we cannot have it, no one can. Their doctrine did not allow for defeat. This was the second escalation, a revelation that changed the entire strategic landscape. They could not simply win the fight. They had to win it in a specific way that neutralized Kalen without triggering his apocalyptic spite. Rostova stared at the icon of the Iron Balance, no longer seeing just an enemy ship, but a bomb with a 10-million-person blast radius. Her arc from restraint to decisiveness was being tested in a crucible. It was not enough to be strong. She had to be precise. She had to be perfect. Solace, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Can you hack it? The AI's response was immediate, and for the first time it sounded something akin to grim. The encryption is formidable, Admiral. It is tied directly to Kalen's personal biocodex. I cannot break it, but I may be able to co-opt it. The key to the cage was in the Keeper's hand. Explain, Rostova commanded. I can insert a logic loop into their command network via the mirror arrays, using their own sensor pulses as a carrier wave. It will not break the encryption, but it will attach a new condition to the detonation command, a new piece of logic. Solace's plan was audacious. It was the digital equivalent of rewriting a law while the ink was still wet. What condition? Jax asked. The current command is if Iron Balance is destroyed, then detonate field. I will amend it to if Iron Balance is destroyed and a Valberan target is in the kill zone, then detonate field. Rostova understood instantly. It was a subtle, brilliant shift. The dead man's switch would no longer be a simple trigger. It would be a conditional one. And that condition was something she could control. We would turn his sword into a shield. Begin the insertion, Solace, Rostova ordered. Jax, prepare the fleet for Operation Open Corridor. We're going to give Executor Kalen exactly what he wanted from the beginning. She tapped the holotank, highlighting the original trap-laden corridor. We are going to make a run for it. Jax looked at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and trust. Admiral, the minefield is still there. Yes, it is, Rostova said, a glint of steel in her eyes. And we are going to fly right through the middle of it. And so is he. The fleet began to move, not with the stealth of the first phase, but with the bold, undeniable purpose of a direct assault. Engines flared to life and the human ships surged forward, aiming for the gap in the hegemony line, the same gap that held the invisible web of smart minds. It was a declaration of intent so brazen, so utterly contrary to tactical sense that it sowed immediate confusion within the enemy fleet. They expected fear. We gave them defiance. The hegemony command net erupted in a cascade of confused queries and tactical alerts. A direct headlong charge into a confirmed minefield was not just unorthodox. It was doctrinal suicide. It was an act of pure desperation, and Executor Kalen's voice, when it came across the open channel again, was layered with a triumphant scorn. So this is the famed human spirit, a final futile gesture before your inevitable annihilation. You have learned nothing. He saw a cornered animal, not a poised predator. Solace status of the logic loop. Rostova said. Her eyes locked on the rapidly approaching threat icons. The ship hummed around her, the deck vibrating with the strain of a full-power burn. Insertion complete. Admiral, the AI's voice replied, a sliver of its processing power now dedicated to maintaining the fragile code within the enemy's network. The new condition is active. Confidence level 99.8%. The hegemony network now requires a Valbran target profile to be within the blast radius for the dead man's switch to activate. It was a poison pill, disguised as a safety protocol. Helm, execute course corrections. Jax relayed his own voice tight. Solace is painting the safe corridor for us now. Stay within the lines. The view on the main screen was a nightmare of proximity alerts. The smart mind's dark and menacing shapes drifted by, some close enough to see the faint glint of their sensor arrays. The fleet moved not in a straight line, but in a serpentine, impossibly precise path, mapped out by the AI's godlike calculations. Every turn was a razor's edge, every second a held breath. The scent of hot electronics filled the bridge, a byproduct of the massive computational load on Solace's systems. Their faith was not in luck, but in calculation. A proximity alarm screamed from a weapons console. Mine at 400 meters port side, an officer called out. It's deviating from its projected drift. It's not deviating, Solace corrected calmly. Its internal guidance just activated. It sees us. Before anyone could react, a pinpoint laser from one of the escort frigates lanced out, striking the mine's primary sensor. The mine went dumb, its guidance system blinded, and it tumbled harmlessly past. It was a small victory, a single note in a symphony of chaos, but it was a testament to the fleet's reflexive discipline. The cost was a flicker of the frigate's shield, as it diverted power, a minor but tangible price. They were not invulnerable, merely prepared. Executor Kalin is hailing us again, Admiral, the communications officer reported. Let him watch. Rostova said, her gaze never leaving the tactical display. Kalin was seeing them pass through his trap unscathed. His confusion would be turning to rage. His doctrine did not account for this. It did not have a chapter for an enemy that refused to die on cue. He is ordering his fleet forward. Jax confirmed, a new set of vectors appearing on the holotank. The iron balance is leading the charge. He's coming into the corridor after us. It was exactly what Rostova had gambled on. Kalin's arrogance, his absolute belief in his own superiority and his own technology would not allow him to accept what he was seeing. He had to see it for himself. He had to prove that the minefield was real, that his power was absolute. He was stepping into his own cage. Pride is the heaviest anchor of all. All ships, Rostova commanded, her voice ringing through the fleet. Prepare for Operation Mirror Ledger. On my mark, we turn the trap inside out. The human fleet cleared the densest part of the minefield, emerging into the relatively clear space beyond. Behind them, Kalin's flagship and his 10 best cruisers followed, their engines burning hot with aggression. They were deep inside the corridor now, surrounded by their own unseen weapons. The moment was perfectly balanced on a knife's edge. He believes we have some secret countermeasure, Jax mused. He wants to capture it. He believes we are a prize to be taken, Rostova corrected. He is about to learn that we are the reckoning. She took a deep breath, the recycled air tasting of imminent conflict. Mark. The universe held its breath. The human fleet did not turn to fight. That was the old math, the old way of war. Instead, a new swarm of drones, larger and more sophisticated than the first, launched from their hulls. In seconds, they formed a vast concave lattice behind the fleet, a perfect parabolic mirror of polished composites and energy emitters. Simultaneously, every ship in the Federation fleet redirected its sensor power, pouring a torrent of active scanning energy, not at the enemy, but at their own mirror array. The effect was instantaneous and mind-bending. The mirror array caught the torrent of sensor data and reflected it back, magnified and multiplied, creating a sensor ghost of impossible scale. On the hegemony screens, it would appear that a second larger Federation fleet, had just materialized out of thin air directly behind them, cutting off their retreat. It was a pincer movement executed with light and lies. We did not need more ships. We needed a better mirror. The Valberan bridge crew on the Iron Balance stared at their consoles in disbelief. One moment they were pursuing a small, fleeing fleet. The next, they were caught between that fleet and a new armada that had appeared from nowhere. Their sensors screamed with conflicting data. Hundreds of weapon locks materialized at once. It was a perfect tactical nightmare. "Executor!" His tactical officer yelled over the rising alarms. "Enemy fleet, bearing 180, they're behind us, we're trapped." Kalen's face projected on a secondary screen on Rostova's console was a mask of fury and disbelief. "Impossible. It's a trick." "All ships fire at will, destroy them all." His fleet, caught in a sensor-induced panic, began to fire wildly. But they were firing at ghosts. Their energy beams and kinetic rounds passed through the spectral images, striking nothing. In their panic, their formations broke. Two of his own cruisers, maneuvering to engage the Phantom fleet, collided, their shields flaring in a brilliant, pointless discharge of energy. Their doctrine had no response for an enemy that wasn't there. Now Jax Rostova said, her voice a blade of ice. "Firing solution locked on the Iron Balance," he confirmed. "One precision disruptor torpedo. It will not penetrate the hull. It will overload their power conduits and trigger a cascade failure in their systems. It will look on every sensor like a catastrophic core breach. Fire!" A single torpedo, silent and swift, left the Vigilance. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of communication. It streaked past the confused hegemony ships and struck the Iron Balance amidships. A bloom of blue-white energy enveloped Kalen's flagship. Its lights flickered and died. Its weapon ports went dark. On sensors, it appeared as a kill, a fatal energy spike consistent with a ship's death. The ledger is the final arbiter. The automated systems of the Valberan minefield registered the event. The dead man's switch was activated. The logic query was initiated. Condition met. Is Iron Balance destroyed? The sensor data tricked by the disruptor torpedo's energy bloom screamed, yes. Condition met. Is a Valberan target profile within the kill zone. The system checked. It saw the Iron Balance itself. It saw the 10 cruisers accompanying it. Yes. The command was given. The logic was satisfied. Then detonate. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the corridor that Kalen had used as a trap became his tomb. The smart mines, hundreds of them, detonated simultaneously. It was not a scattered series of explosions, but a single unified wave of destructive energy. A wall of plasma and shrapnel expanded outwards, a self-inflicted wound on a systemic scale. The 10 hegemony cruisers, their shields already oriented toward the Phantom fleet behind them, were struck from the sides and front by the full fury of their own weapons. Shields buckled and failed, hulls cracked. One ship vanished entirely, its core breached by a dozen simultaneous impacts. The others were savaged, left crippled and bleeding energy into the void. Their ultimatum had finally been answered by themselves. The Iron Balance, its power already dead, was tossed violently by the shockwave, its hull scorched and battered, but its life support and internal structure remained intact. Kalen was alive adrift in a graveyard of his own, making a silent witness to the utter failure of his doctrine. The brilliant light of the explosions reflected off the hull of the Vigilance, a final terrible lesson. Aboard the Vigilance, a shudder ran through the deck as a piece of shrapnel from a destroyed Valberan ship moving at incredible velocity struck the port engineering section. Alarms blared. "Hull breach on Deck 7, a voice called from damage control. Fires reported. We have 3 wounded, no fatalities. The section is contained." It was the second tangible cost of their victory, a reminder that no plan was perfect. "We accept the cost and settle the account." The Phantom fleet created by the mirror array flickered and vanished. The drones went inert. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by the crackle of open-channel distress calls from the surviving Valbaran ships. The ultimatum clock on Rostova's screen had stopped its purpose, rendered meaningless. The blockade was broken. A civilian observer on Viridian, the off-duty pilot, watched his bootleg feed with tears streaming down his face. The hostile icons on his screen had been replaced by a field of wreckage and a flurry of Federation rescue beacons. He saw the grand deception, the trap turned inside out, and the stunning surgical precision of it all. He was witnessing the birth of a legend. A story he would tell his grandchildren. A promise made is a debt paid. Rostova stood straight, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. She looked at the devastation on the screen, not with triumph, but with a somber gravity. The lesson had been taught, and the cost had been high, but it had been paid entirely by the one who had written the bill. Solace, open a channel to all surviving Valbaran vessels, she ordered. Her voice was quiet, yet it commanded the absolute attention of the bridge. Broadcast in the clear. No encryption. A moment later, she spoke her words, reaching across the void to the crippled ships and the silent, drifting flagship of Executor Kalin. This is Admiral Eva Rostova of the Terran Federation Fleet Carrier Vigilance. The confrontation is over. Your ultimatum has been rendered void by your own doctrine. She paused, letting the truth of that statement settle into the minds of her listeners. We are not your executioners. We are transmitting medical triage protocols and schematics for emergency hull patches. Our medical shuttles are standing by. We will render aid to any who request it. The choice, as always, is yours. There is no honor in defeating an enemy. There is only honor in teaching them. There was no immediate response. Only the panicked cross-chatter of the Valbaran crews as they fought to save their ships and their wounded. But then a single light on a crippled cruiser blinked, switching its transponder from a hostile to a neutral code. A request for assistance. Another followed. And another. They're accepting, Admiral Jax said, his voice filled with a quiet wonder. The hegemony's public ledger, as updating Solace reported its voice back to its calm, dispassionate tone. Multiple fleet commanders outside this system are citing Kalin's catastrophic failure. They are petitioning for a full review of the ultimatum doctrine. The precedent is being set in real time. The institutional consequence had been logged. The doctrine broken on the anvil of Viridian would not survive. Rostova watched the rescue shuttle's small points of light and hope moving from her fleet toward the shattered remains of her enemies. She had held the line. She had enforced the mandate. She had faced a monster and refused to become one. The arc of her own journey from calculated restraint to a decisive righteous clarity felt complete. She turned her gaze from the wreckage to the planet Viridian, now safe under her watch. A marbled blue and green jewel no longer held hostage. The mirror arrays, their duty done, began to cool, their brilliant reflective surfaces, dimming from a dazzling silver to a flat, unassuming pewter. Strength is not a function of the threats you can make, but of the choices you can offer. An ultimatum is a failure of imagination, a cage built for two. We showed them that the lock was on their side of the door. We gave them the key, and when they refused to use it, we simply reminded them that the walls were of their own making. The ledger is balanced not when the debt is paid in blood, but when the need for the debt is erased. A reckoning is not an end. It is a beginning.